Good evening, everyone. My name is Taufeeq Ahmed, your host from Kehte Sunte 89.32 GLFFM. Today, I have a very special guest with us who is going to give us an insight on a very important and pressing issue. I have with me Honorable Chris Bowen, the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. He is also the member for McMahon in New South Wales. Minister Bowen is a passionate advocate for climate action. He believes that Australia must transition to a clean energy economy to protect our planet and create jobs. He has a plan to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 through investments in renewable energy, energy efficiency, and electric vehicles. Minister Chris Bowen, along with the US Special Presidential Envoy for Climate Change, John Kerry, have signed recently a Clean Energy Demand Initiative, a letter of intent to break down barriers for US companies to invest in Australia's clean energy industries and for his sustainable energy initiatives. Lo and behold, he was recently in India as well during the G20 energy transition, where he did meet the energy minister of India as well. So, Chris, before we dive into the pressing issues today, tell us, how was India? It was almost tyrannical to see you. It's like the equivalent of being called in Byron Bay in a tuxedo suit. You were talking about energy efficiency in Goa. Tell us a little bit about that.
Hey, Taufeeq, thanks for having us on. Yeah, it's very interesting. I lose count. I'm not sure how many times I've been to India. I've lost count. I've forgotten. It's 12 or 13 or 14 or something like that. I don't know. But the first place I went to in India was Goa in 1998. On my first trip to India, I went to Goa. I went to Mumbai and Goa and Hyderabad and a few other places. And then I hadn't been back to Goa since 1998. I've been to India many times, but I've never been back to Goa. And, R.K. Singh, the Indian energy minister, he said to me last year, I have to host G20. Where do you think I should host it? I said, okay, how about Goa? And he said, done. Yes, okay. So,
oh my goodness, I never knew that was a choice from your end. That's a bit of an insight. Thank you for sharing that with us. And while you were there, India, as much as it's all about strengthening the relationships, it's also serving your palate. So, what's your memory with the favorite food there?
Well, the thing is, Taufeeq, you at these conferences, it sounds all like it's lots of fun, but you're actually working almost all the time, and you're having working dinners.
True.
But in Goa, I had the RK hosted all the energy ministers from around the world at a or the G20, I should say, at a lunch, and it was like a tasting plate of different foods in different parts of India. It was lovely as always. So. That was very special indeed. But he also took us on a river cruise, and then the G20 ministers also met. The Parliament ministers met in Chennai. So also managed to get a little bit of food there as well.
Brilliant. When you've been to all the favorite spots to eat lovely food that we have to offer. And now, while coming back to Australia, I must say, as much as you've been in clean energy champions, and I have personally been a part of renewable energy industry, and even now dealing with electric vehicles as one of my priority focus works, I must congratulate you for the initiatives that you're doing. But coming on to your initiatives for beyond the energy initiatives, if I may use that term. You have had a long and distinguished career in public service. You have held a number of ministerial positions and portfolios, including Treasurer, Minister for Human Services, Minister for Immigration, and Minister for Small Businesses. Now, you have been a strong advocate for social justice and economic opportunities as well. This is basically where we took the cue, and thanks to Mahasangh volunteers, Arunesh, who actually made this interview possible, that we can talk about this very pressing issue with you. The Yes campaign, the voice to Australian Parliament. Now, we come from a South Asian background, and most of my primary audience does as well. We have already seen history of a couple of centuries where our voice was taken away. Yet, we did, with our own means, get our voice back, and we are doing, I say, decently well so far. But then we still have this issue there. There is a lot of non-information and misinformation, and I would like to take this opportunity very quickly from you to let the South Asian diaspora and the Australian public in general to know, what is this referendum about?
So this referendum really started about 6 years ago when the Indigenous people of Australia, their leaders and elders, had a big meeting in Uluru and issued a statement from the heart, which said to Australia, look, we're not recognising the Constitution. 60,000 years of stewardship of our country is not mentioned in our Constitution. But we don't just want to be mentioned in the Constitution. We want to work together on the inequalities in Australia. You know, an Indigenous boy is more likely to go to jail than university. And that says our system's still unfair. And an Indigenous person lives on average about 8 years less than a non-Indigenous Australian. So we still have plenty of inequalities in Australia, unfairness, particularly in relation to our First Nations people. And so the Voice is simply a committee to work with government, to advise government on how to do these things. You know, we spend billions of dollars, but it's not always well spent because the people who are impacted aren't always consulted. And so I think, you know, there's the subcontinental South Asian community. I think, you know, you're right, fairness is very important. And this is about fairness. And, you know, there's evidence that genetically Australia's Indigenous people and Indian people and subcontinental people are linked, that Aboriginal people came from India many, many tens of thousands of years ago. So I think there's a special bond there. So really, absolutely, if you're voting for yes, you're voting for fairness and you're voting for a better country, not just for Indigenous people, but for entire country is better off if Indigenous people are treated more fairly.
Sure. And if you could be a little more specific for our audience with regards to how does the future look like with a yes vote winning in the referendum?
So the important thing about knowing how the future looks for a yes vote is it makes no difference really to you or me. You know, our lives don't change. Nobody's worse off. But hopefully Indigenous people are better off because they have some say in the matters that affect them. So there's lots of lies and myths out there. I've seen some people saying, oh, that means they get land rights to your house or your rent. It's all, none of it's true. What it means is when we are looking at the government and saying, listen, Indigenous people, their health outcomes are much worse. What are we going to do about it? We meet with the Voice and hear their views and talk about, well, how are we dealing with alcohol in these communities? What else are we doing? This is their lives hopefully become better off and nobody else's life becomes worse off. And we all get lifted as a country. Money's better spent, better targeted, and we all can feel better about the country because we have a fairer country.
Thank you. Well, do you see that there are any potential threats if the yes vote does not go through in the future?
I think it'll be sad for Australia. I mean, obviously we'll respect the result, but I think the biggest threat is that nothing changes. We just keep going like this. You know, we still get poor health outcomes. We still get poor outcomes. We still get, you know, unfairness, and nothing changes. And I think it will be a very big missed opportunity for our country.
Thank you for sharing that. And lastly, Mr. Bowen, this is one thing I do, of course, personally always lead with, is that it is the youth that decides the future of the country. And today, the youth is actually listening to us and wanting to understand one fair and one strong reason why they should get up and become a part of that referendum. They should be participating in the democracy and participating in the welfare of the Indigenous Australians. What would be your closing statement to that?
I think, as I said, subcontinental people understand fairness, understand the importance of empowerment. You know, when India was empowered in 1940s, you know, is now taking its place as one of the world's great countries, independence. We can empower our own country. We can empower our drive to fairness with Indigenous people, with Australia coming together in a unified moment for our country and noting that we are fixing this anomaly.
Thank you. Chris, this was a lovely chat, and thank you for being so candid, and thank you for sharing your experience around the Yes Vote campaign as well. We do, I believe, have the early voting sessions already open tonight, and you have stayed late night for this conversation beyond your working hours. So thank you for doing this. How does the person who wants to vote go about doing it? What are the first few steps that we need to do to make sure we find ourselves voting?
You can vote on October 14 at the normal places, the normal schools and what have you. You can vote early at You can find online the places to vote early. So, for example, there's one in my area, one in Fairfield, one in Wetherill Park, one in Parramatta. And you just go in and just write YES, nice and simple, write yes, and then your vote counts.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Chris. I will leave you with this particular thought that when it comes to India and Australia and the indigenous people, this is something which we've always discussed but never been able to put it on record, especially in the conversations that I have. So thank you for actually leading with that statement that the indigenous Australians and the Indian genetics do have a very strong bond. Yet another reason for us to be a part of the Yes campaign. So thank you so much for spending your time. Thank you on behalf of all the audience of Kehte Sunte Radio 89.3 2GLFFM. We do go on air every Thursdays 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. The only Indian show which people do listen for more than 2 hours. So thank you, Chris, for being a part of it, and we look forward to be inviting you someday live on show.
I'd love to. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much.
Cheers.